Hello, everyone. Nice to see all of you in the boxes. I'm Adrian Badu, Deputy Director and COO of TCG, and I use he, him pronouns, and I'm zooming in from the land of the Lenape peoples. Sorry about the beep. At this time, I would love to invite you all to share your own land acknowledgement in the chat. Um, Before we go right into this, I just want to say a big thank you to all the TCG staff members on this call for continuing to lean into this work with so much love and grace. So lots of appreciation for all of you. Right now, I am thrilled to welcome you all to this meeting for Black, Indigenous Theaters of Color, or BITOC, on accessing federal relief funds. Today, we're focusing our conversation on the current federal relief funds, including the Shuttered Venues Operators Grants, formerly known as Safer Stages, the renewed Payroll Protection Program, and newly expanded Employee Retention Tax Credits. We'll share some research on the successes and challenges BITOC have faced in accessing past rounds of relief, hear updates and detailed information on the 3 upcoming opportunities, and hear from BITOC leaders who will share reflections about their experience with PPP and any advice they may have. At the closing of our session, we'll have some time for a more intimate discussion for a little Q&A. And before we begin, just a few more items. We're dropping a link in the chat from a previously recorded webinar from January 18th, where we talked about relief opportunities. Also, today's webinar will be recorded and archived for easy access on the Circle. Also, you may access peer-to-peer support in TCG Circle in the finance staff group. If you're not connected, please email Corinna and she will get you connected. There's a lot of useful information happening in that group. Also, TCG is committing resources to provide technical assistance for you by our own interim CFO, Andrea Nellis. Once guidelines and applications are released, we will announce a schedule of sessions for BITOCs with Andrea to help with applications and answer any questions. Now it's my great pleasure to invite Snehal Desai, Producing Artistic Director of East West Players, and Leslie Ishii, Artistic Director of Perseverance Theater and Board President of Kata, to share their perspectives on BITOC theaters and access to federal relief funding. Thanks again for joining us.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Adrian, for that lovely introduction, and welcome everybody. So glad you're here. It's so important. Um, uh, Snehal and I are both working with Kata. We also have a national coalition of the BITOC theater network. So we, as you can tell, we got the word out as fast as we could to make sure we had support. We were advocating for that, to have these sessions specifically designed for you all. So with that, again, we want to welcome you. We also kind of want to just do a bit of a check-in. So there's a few questions that we have just to offer you an opportunity, maybe a few folks for each question, to sort of get our conversation going. So when we get the work going too, you'll be warmed up. Yeah. So with that, I will pass the baton to you, Snehal.
Thank you, Leslie. And thank you, Adrian. Yes, my name is Snehal Desai, not Lori Baskin, so I wouldn't mind being Lori Baskin. We wanted to just start with some questions and then also just open things up, to hear from some of you as we continue about what your experiences have been thus far. So if you want to just use the reactions button, or you can put it in the chat, or you can also do a thumbs up or down. We would love to know who has received federal support, federal COVID relief support already of this group.
Okay.
Great.
I see some thumbs up and some no's. Okay.
Great. And then, yes, who has applied for federal support but not received any?
Yay.
Okay, a couple thumbs up, and yeah.
And then what about state level COVID relief? Who has received state level COVID relief?
I see some no's.
And then,
One, yeah.
And we would love to hear, what is, Lori's going to go into a lot more of the specifics, but what do you think is, we would love to hear about any positive experiences in terms of relief that folks have experienced, as well as just kind of what is happening at a couple of your theaters and what you feel, where you feel like the safety nets are missing our communities and our organizations.
Yeah, anybody care to share? Go ahead and silence and jump in. And then if you want to chat after that person, if you can put your name in the chat, we'll start a speaking order.
This is Ricardo Pitts-Wiley from Rhode Island. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
We have received some funding, and there's some things that are being through federal funding through the state. We didn't go directly to the federal government. But one of the concerns that we have is organizations and state and federal organizations seem to be carving out a chunk of money for BIPOC organizations, but it's such a small amount that they're taking the point of view that we'll reserve this little pot of money for BIPOC organizations and not include us in the bigger pot of money that's to be distributed, so it becomes BIPOC, as this group over here, and everything white over here. So we do have a concern about that. I'll mute myself and listen.
Ricardo, can you just introduce your theater and where you're located?
I'm at Mixed Magic Theater in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. We're a 20-year organization, and we have 2 indoor theaters and an outdoor amphitheater that we run.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are there others who have had similar experiences? Or any others? I know for at East West, one of the biggest things we ran into was with PPP that you needed a lender, right? That this late breaking news that you needed to go through a bank, and the relationships with your bank really is what drove how fast you had access to that money and if you got it before it ran out. So I'm wondering if others had similar situations that they ran into. Or if there's any hesitancy or things that you're worried about with this next round of both PPP and the Shuttered Venue Grant.
The thing, this is Chandra from True Colors in Atlanta, Georgia. And the thing that's concerning me about this round is the lack of clarity around what does earned revenue mean? What does revenue mean? What you can and can't combine and how those things may or may not overlap. The changing rules every 15 minutes. So the first PPP was characterized by, like you said, Snehal, who's my bank? My bank was Wells Fargo, and they didn't have time for a little tiny theater. Then we did find a lender, which took a while. Now they're not forgiving because they're focused on the next round. So it's a lot of different moving pieces, and it's quite difficult to keep track of all that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I know, I believe Lori will talk a lot about that because a lot of stuff was just released from the SBA. And I think, yes, a lot of those things are unknown. So thank you.
Yeah. If I might jump in, this is Ricardo again. We have a lender. We have a good relationship with a lender. But our problem was, and I found it with other organizations, that we are a 1099 organization. So we pay artists and crews and so on a fee most of the time, but we're a 1099 organization, and they were not dealing with 1099 organizations. Even though my bank, to their credit, was able to engineer some things that would have allowed us to do it, but they had to engineer it, and they had to take the initiative to do it.
Mm. Okay, thank you, Ricardo.
Can I add something?
Torange?
Hi, everybody. This is Torange from Golden Thread in San Francisco, land of the Ohlone Ramaytush tribes. We, for the second round, the point of confusion for us is having to choose between PPP and SOS. And so much seems to be undefined about SOS. Like, how do we make that choice? So currently, that's the biggest point of confusion for us and challenge.
Hi, Sharon Samuel from Houston, Texas, the Ensemble Theater. And I agree, same here. We're in the same position, is that we have about 2 weeks to decide if we're going to apply for PPP before funds run out. And we're sitting here trying to figure out, well, how much are we even eligible for under SOS? SOS seems to be better. I do apologize. SOS seems to be better for us because you can have more expenditure latitude, but then we don't want to lose out on a known funding source, because we do have a relationship with our bank and we're able to seamlessly pull PPP funds for round 1, and they've already sent us a link for round 2. But we know what we're eligible for PPP, but not for SOS. And so it makes it very difficult to make the decision with the unknowns.
Okay, thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you for those who shared. In the interest of time, because this is helping us get a feel for where you all are at, and we want to make sure we get onto the actual session so it's productive for you. Snehal and I continue to work on a work group that will continue to advocate and work for clarification as we get closer to the drop date for application. And we're working in close concert with TCG and NEVA and some of the other groups. So just know we're continuing to advocate for you all so that we can have successful applications, but also so for further relief packages down the road here. This is a moment, and so it's a time to all come together and work in concert. So with that, thank you so much. And thank you, Snehal. I'm going to now pass the baton to Amelia.
Hey friends, thank you so much, Snehal and Leslie and all those who brought up questions. I know that Lori's going to have a lot of information for you. Some questions we may not have answers with. And we also, we'll talk about this in a little bit, we'll be providing small group sessions where you'll be able to more directly get your questions asked, and even an opportunity to go line by line through some of these applications. Forgot to introduce myself. Friends, I'm Amelia Cachapero. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Artistic and International Programs at TCG. And I'm calling in from the ancestral home of the Lenape people, otherwise known as Manhattan. For visuals, I'm a brown-skinned Filipino with short black hair, black glasses. I've got a yellow turtleneck, a black and white puffy vest, and my background, I'm sitting in front of a blue wall. And actually you may see one of my cats, a tortoiseshell, walking in front of the screen periodically. She tends to do that. So actually, before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge the barriers that BIPOC-owned businesses have faced in the first round of relief funds, as well as some of the successes BITOCs have found in spite of it. And we'll be hearing from a few other folks throughout today. A couple of other folks, Chandra and Torange, who spoke a second ago, will be coming back to talk a bit more about their experiences. You know, we know that systemic racism and sexism have long denied BIPOC-owned businesses equitable access to loans and made it especially challenging for BIPOC women. Please feel free to take a look through links in your own time. We're going to be putting a slide up in a moment. And there it goes. And you're going to have access to the full slide deck as well. The research bias, the research website links, I think is, yeah, if you just click on this when you get the slide deck, you'll be able to go more in depth here. But you know, these bias dynamics played out during the first round of PPP loans. but some research that TCG has conducted suggests that it's very much worth applying for these upcoming opportunities, because during the last round of PPP, at least 45 BITOCs were able to access support. And that's not a complete list, but just kind of some cursory review. And here we go. Here's a list of some folks who received PPP in round one. Okay. In tailoring today's session, we worked with Snehal and Leslie, who were on just a second ago, as well as Teresa Coleman-Wash at Bishop Arts, to craft a BITOC inquiry form to survey you all and folks at BITOC about questions on the upcoming relief opportunities. We received a range of responses, and here are some of the points that had the most heat, right? Give a second to just scan through those for you all. Many of these questions are going to be addressed throughout today's session, but I wanted to lift up 2 points in particular that are very, very much related to systems. One, how can we create more equitable income security for BITOCs? And then also, how can you prove you need the money when you're operating with a volunteer staff and have a small annual budget to begin with? Those are challenges, particularly that are part of the things that theaters of color, BITOCs, have been facing. So all of these federal relief programs, the SVOG, which was formerly called SOS, Shuttered Venues, and then the PPP and the ERTC, all of these Lori's going to go into more in depth. So I know I'm rattling off some acronyms here. But these are meant to provide financial relief for lost income due to COVID. If there wasn't an expenditure because it was a volunteer activity, that is not really meant to be served by these forms of relief, unfortunately. I'm hoping that at TCG, we can find ways to speak to funders about establishing appropriate grants and support to help organizations that rely on the support of their volunteers. We know that that's a big gap right now in these relief funds. And so we'll be reaching back out to you for testimonials in support of the work that we do with other grant makers and other organizations. So finally, I'd like to give special thanks to the internal TCG team, Adrian referred to this earlier, that have worked really pretty quickly to help make, there was a session yesterday and a session today possible. Elena Chang, who's our director of ED&I initiatives, ED&I associate Sarah Machko-Haber, Erica Lauren Ortiz, who's behind the scenes here, and Anne Charlone in marketing and production, Rachel Hipp Flores and Corinna Schulenberg in communications, and me. And of course, with support from Adrian and our executive director, Teresa Eyring. Now, I'm happy to turn things over to my colleague, Lori Baskin, who is so enmeshed in all of these bits of information to share about these opportunities. TCG's advocacy department has been working super hard to not only secure these major federal relief and recovery funds, but to ensure that past barriers faced by BITOCs are addressed in the current legislation. Lori, take it away.
Thanks so much, Amelia. And I won't rename everybody, but I am also grateful to the entire TCG team for making this possible. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. Thanks to Leslie and Snehal for working with us, and Teresa also for getting us ready and prepared to do this today. My own introduction. I'm Lori Baskin. I've been at TCG over 20 years in a variety of wearing different hats, but I am director of advocacy, calling into from northern Westchester near Peekskill, New York, the ancestral lands of the Lenape and Wappinger people. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm going to be working closely with my colleague Erica, who is going to be, I think she is sharing her screen, and we're going to be going through a whole bunch of slides and a lot of information. And so I'm going to just dive in. And yes, the slides will be shared, the recording will be shared, and we want to leave time at the end to answer a lot of your questions, and we'll do the best we can. I'm going to be covering 3 major buckets of federal relief. And there are a few others, but these are the 3 main ones that we want to try and unpack today. The Shuttered Venue Operator Grants, SVOG, used to be called Save Our Stages, but in the legislation, it actually has a new name. So we're going to be calling it SVOG, and that's what the acronym stands for, Shuttered Venue Operator Grants. It is a grant. It used to be called Save Our Stages. As you know, the application and guidelines are not posted yet, but we'll talk more about that timeline in a bit. This program cannot be paired with the Paycheck Protection Program. As you know, you have to choose. The Paycheck Protection Program is a forgivable loan. It's a loan, and as you know, you go through a local lender. The grant under SVOG will likely be through, well, it will be through grants.gov. The Paycheck Protection Program, which I'll call PPP, is a forgivable loan, and once again, you're working with a bank or another local lender. The round 2 opened on January 11th. If you didn't go for a round 1, you still can and follow the guidelines for round 1 if you didn't go for a PPP yet, but now we'll mostly be talking about PPP 2. Those applications are open and available through only, the deadline is March 31st. And again, in reverse, it cannot be paired with an SVOG. You'll have to choose. The last category we'll talk about is the Employee Retention Tax Credits. It does make my eyes spin a little bit. Tax stuff is always a little complicated, but it's a refundable tax credit, and I'll go into that at the end. It does pair with PPP and retroactively through 2020. And it can be a chunk of money that most of us weren't really thinking about and focused on. So I'm going to urge you to look into that one. It is not clear yet whether it can be paired with the Shuttered Venue Operator Grants. We are asking for that. So now I'm going to really do a deep dive into the Shuttered Venue Operator Grants. Next slide, please, Erica. This bill authorizes the Small Business Administration to make grants to eligible live venue operators, producers, promoters, or talent representatives to address specifically the economic effects of COVID-19. $2 billion is reserved for eligible applications with organizations with up to 50 full-time employees. In other words, $2 billion is set aside for what SBA considers to be small organizations. They're not actually setting aside money for BITOC organizations or organizations of color. It's this is the piece that's the set aside, the $2 billion for smaller organizations according to your employee count. Eligibility is offered to both for-profit and nonprofit applicants, as well as motion picture theater operators, some relevant museum operators, and talent representatives. TCG and the Performing Arts Alliance have urged SBA to offer specific public engagement, technical assistance, and awareness efforts for minority-led and underserved performing arts entities as SBA rolls out the Shuttered Venues program. The guidance that they offered for, what the federal government terms minority-owned entities and so forth for PPP came out rather late. They didn't issue it at all during the course of 2020 when PPP 1 was open. So we'd like them to offer that guidance and technical assistance and awareness efforts earlier on. And we've urged them to contact, they have, I think, 68 regional SBA offices. If you have not reached out to your regional SBA office yet to get to know those folks, I would suggest that you do that as soon as possible. Introduce yourself and let them know who you are, and that you're going to be wanting to work with them on this program, at least to gather information, even if you haven't made a decision yet. I'd urge you reach out. Next slide, please. Theaters can qualify to apply even if they do not own their performance space. Our understanding, and we are looking for affirmative confirmation of this, but you do not need to own your space, and you can perform in multiple different spaces around town and still be eligible. You do not need to be a 501c3 to apply. Remember, SBA is the Small Business Administration. They never gave money to nonprofits before last year. This is like a historic new thing for them, and they're trying to learn about our world. But SVOG is intended for both for-profits and nonprofits, so you don't have to be a C3. To qualify, you're going to show, you need to show a minimum 25% decline in gross earned revenue in one calendar quarter of 2020 compared to the same quarter in 2019. We're going to come back to that gross earned revenue piece in a little bit. You're also going to need to show that not less than 70% of the earned revenue of your organization is generated through cover charges or ticket sales, production fees or production reimbursements, nonprofit educational initiatives, or the sale of event beverages, food, or merchandise. This bill was crafted for small commercial music venues that have like a cover charge and a bar and bar food and drink and so forth. So yeah, that's why it originally said, the bill said cover charges or ticket sales and event beverages. We got that bill expanded to include the production fees and educational initiatives and so forth. But they want to know that the organization is primarily about, and that your budget shows that you're primarily about performing arts. And I saw that there was a question in the chat, and I know that my colleagues will help me come back to that in just a bit. Not less than 70% of your earned revenue is generated through those things, or, and the or was so important here in the bill, that a principal business activity is that you make your tickets available for sale to the public at least 60 days in advance of your events. So that's a big or, and likely you probably fit in one or the other of those definitions. Next slide, please. Actually, let me see if I can answer that one question that came in. Is owned the same thing as long-term lease? You don't need to own your space. Long-term lease or rental of different spaces around town, you should be eligible for SVOG. The grant will cover costs that are incurred from March 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2021. Supplemental grants are for an additional period of March last year through June 30th of 2022. Honestly, I don't know if there's going to be enough money for supplemental grants, so I'm really focusing on round one grants through SVOG. That's the time period we're looking at, March 1st last year through the end of this current calendar year. Allowable expenses include payroll, including payments to independent contractors, rent, fixed costs like mortgage and debt payments, maintenance expenses, administrative costs, and so forth. We're going to come back to the independent contractor piece toward the end. SBI, I'm looking at the question. SBA website says first draw. I haven't gotten there yet. We're gonna talk about the priority periods in a moment. The 70% was overall eligibility for the program. How to do the math. You want to know what's your grant amount? It's going to be based on 45% of an entity's gross earned revenue in 2019 with a cap of $10 million. The Small Business Administration has not yet defined gross earned revenue. Well, they have. I prepared this presentation before the guidance came out yesterday, and I'm going to talk about that for just a moment. The Performing Arts Alliance, PAA, is advocating for gross earned revenue to be based on the Form 990 Part 8 to include total program service revenue, royalties, gross rents, and gross sales of inventory, less returns and allowances. and that we define earned revenue as everything included in gross earned revenue less any expenses and costs that are directly deducted on Form 990, Part 8, to achieve the net totals. So those are our definitions. The guidance that came out yesterday, and I will give you a link, or one of my colleagues will later on in this presentation, we'll drop it into the chat. SBA has a page on their website devoted to shuttered venues, and they did yesterday, and they'll continue to provide updated guidance. They are suggesting that gross earned revenue and earned revenue be more according to accrual method of accounting, rather than using the definitions that appear in the Form 990. They're not all that different, but basically you're talking about earned revenue, not contributed revenue. Next slide, please. Here's where we're talking about the priority periods. When do you apply? Well, first of all, the minute the applications open, hopefully you have enough information between now and then. SBA is talking about rolling out and giving sufficient notice that an application will come. They say they're going to do some sort of training or provide sufficient guidance online. But when the application opens, you should apply. If you're applying to this program, do not wait until the priority period when you think you're eligible. SBA will take care of that. You should apply early. I think it's going to be a first come, first serve type of a situation. The first 14 days, they're prioritizing organizations that have had a revenue decline of 90% or more from April 1st through December 31st last year, compared to the same period of 2019. The second 14 days, they'll prioritize organizations that had a revenue decline of 70% or more the same time period. We're talking about April 1st through December 31st of 2020 compared to 2019. We think that revenue will be defined as including both earned and contributed revenue, but we're not sure. It might end up being only based on earned revenue. If it's based on decline in earned revenue, we think nonprofits would get in right away. We think that legislative intent and the advocacy from our for-profit colleagues, they feel that they're disadvantaged compared to nonprofits because they can't raise charitable income. And therefore, entities that have had a 90% revenue decline overall, and nonprofits, including your charitable income, that those that have no opportunity for charitable income are suffering more greatly and should be prioritized first. We will see. We've asked the SBA to be clear in their guidelines about what they mean by revenue. We've told them that if they don't include, if they focus on earned revenue, nonprofits have a better chance of coming in the first 28 days. If they focus on overall revenue decline, including charitable contributions, that could be a chilling effect for nonprofits, and that nonprofits may choose to go for PPP or something else. So we've raised it with them. I'm thinking that BITOC organizations and smaller organizations may find yourselves more eligible during the priority periods, and I'll be interested to hear about that in a little bit when we get to Q&A. Relief funds already accessed through the CARES Act do not count as revenue for this calculation. So if you got PPP last year, it does not include in your definition of revenue. We've also asked about how SVOG would treat seasonal organizations. It does talk about regular programming in their guidelines online, in their FAQs. So we want a specific affirmative comment from SBA about how they would treat seasonal organizations. The good news is also that 20% of the funds are reserved for after the 28-day priority periods. And so if nonprofits don't get in during those 28 days, we are expecting that there would be 20% of the funds left for after that would likely and largely serve nonprofits. Next slide, please.
Lori, it's Amelia. Before you move on, there's maybe a couple of things questions that were in the chat that I think were connected to what you were just saying about, there's a question about in the SBA website, entities that suffered 90% or greater revenue loss between April to December 2020. This person was reading that as the entire time of April to December and not a chosen quarter.
That's correct.
Okay,
It's that
good.
entire period, not a quarter for that particular calculation. That's correct.
And could you elaborate on the definition of administrative costs?
I don't know that I can, but maybe later Andrea can at the end.
Okay.
I don't know. What you're going to need to get prepared, if you're interested in SVOG, is your DUNS number. And again, you're going to get these slides within the next couple days. And these are hyperlinks to grants.gov, where you would actually get your sign up for, if you don't already have one, a DUNS number and a SAMS number. So the DUNS number is a data universal number system, and it's the first step in an organization being able to apply on grants.gov. The next step is registering with the System for Award Management, SAM, and it's also a required step in order for your organization to be able to apply for federal grants. I understand that that could take a few days to even a few weeks. If you do not have a SAMS number, or it hasn't been updated, because I think that this is something that needs to be renewed annually, please get on that right away. If you think there's any chance that you're going to want to apply for an SVOG grant, do not wait till the application period opens. And again, apply early, even if you don't think you fit into the priority periods. And next slide, please. I think before I jump into the next bucket, which is the Paycheck Protection Program, I think we have some guests who are going to speak to their experience, and I'm going to just turn it back to my colleague Amelia to focus on that part of our program.
Thanks, Lori, for going through all the SVOG, a lot of valuable information there. We've got a couple of other colleagues, folks that I wanted to have them step up to the mic, as it were. Torange Yeghiazarian from Golden Thread Productions in San Francisco, who you saw earlier, and Chandra Stephens-Albright from True Colors. We actually wanted them to take a moment to talk about their recent experiences with PPP, and this might shed some light, particularly before Lori goes into PPP more in depth. So Torange, I see you on the screen. Do you want to jump in?
I will jump in. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Lori, for all that information. It's very helpful to see everything in one place. So our experience with PPP, I have to begin by saying it's all thanks to our managing director, Michelle Mulholland, that we were able to get through the process. And it's thanks to her attention to detail and patience that all the documents were completed correctly and submitted on time. So we began, when PPP was introduced, we began by reaching out to our bank first. Citibank is our bank, and like someone else said, they had no time for us, and within 24 hours or 48 hours of the PPP announcement, there was a message on their website saying, don't contact us about PPP. We have no information about the program. So that was no good. So we contacted a nonprofit, a local Bay Area nonprofit lender or finance organization called Community Visions. This was an organization that we had received some financial training from before, and also had an active line of credit with. And they recommended that we contact another nonprofit lender called Community Reinvestment. And we were able to secure PPP through Community Reinvestment. When we calculated how much we qualify for, because PPP is for payroll and rent, we actually qualified for more than what we applied for, but we decided to apply for just the amount that we knew we could spend in 8 weeks, so that we would apply for forgiveness of that amount. And the forgiveness process, I believe, has been put on hold, but our application has already been submitted for forgiveness. And because our financial situation, knock on wood, is okay right now, we received notice from Community Reinvestment that we've actually been prioritized at a second level of a nonprofit organization for PPP, because they're prioritizing organizations that are sort of experiencing more financial peril than we are.
Interesting. So did you haven't gotten your forgiveness yet, right, Torange?
That is correct.
Okay, so we haven't either. We had a similar situation. We were with Wells Fargo, and they literally, like you said, 24 hours later, don't call us. And then after that, they said, don't apply. Apply somewhere else because we can't help you, which was, so we had a couple of theaters in Atlanta who had Wells Fargo. It was wonderful about the Atlanta experience that we all got together and started throwing out ideas and who had success with whom. So I was directed to Harvest Bank, which is actually in California. And they provided our loan. We also did the 8 weeks. The biggest challenge for us, which probably won't be an issue now since no one's producing, was figuring out FTEs, because we have W-2 actors on our payroll. We weren't sure how to cover that. So there was quite a bit of anxiety about how to deal with non-permanent, if you will, W-2s. We made it through that.
What did you decide to do?
We decided just to go with our full-time staff. And I had to send all those names on the payroll documents, and I hope to God they didn't say, well, you have 50 people, but you're only applying for 7. But
yeah, it's interesting because we asked our lender and they advised that just calculate the whole payroll for that period, which included actors and stage managers. And then in the forgiveness process, there was some clause that said temporary employees would not be, like the amount that was spent on temporary employees would not be forgiven, but I believe that was then eliminated. So
gotcha. Well, at the top of this call, I talked about how the rules kept changing. Yeah. And so that was one of the frustrations. So we did not apply for those people. So we did not get that money. And also, like you, we're in pretty good shape right now. So we're holding it. And we just want to have a note saying this is forgiven before we, absolutely say, okay, fine, take it out of this little account over here. When we contacted them for forgiveness, same thing. They'll let us know in March. So it's good that we got the funds. It helped us out quite a bit. But the worry is, are they really going to forgive this? They have simplified the form. There's now a new, I think it's called an S form that you can use to get reimbursed. But I can't get it. I know it's there, but I can't get it. So
when we get to
thank you. Just that firsthand. Okay.
I just wanted to say, when we get to the Q&A portion, I have a bunch of things I want to share on this because I do think all of the theaters can get forgiven. And I also wanted to comment that if you did not apply for the full amount of the first round PPP, you can go back and get more of it because now the forgiveness can be on 24 weeks. But we can talk about that when we get to the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you.
And I just wanted to actually introduce Andrea Nellis, who's on our TCG team. And Andrea has offered to do some small group time after the applications are out. What we mentioned at the top, we'll be able to answer specific questions and even go line by line if necessary. I think Torange and Chandra, your firsthand experience in talking about this is so invaluable, and hopefully it'll help other people shortcut, or work around. And I can't underscore enough what I keep hearing from so many people is the value of community lenders and those partnerships with organizations that are not necessarily the regular banks. So I think more on this at the Q&A at the end. What we might do is pass it back over to Lori, and then we'll pick this back up at the end. Thank you all. Lori?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Torange and Chandra. That's your experiences are not unique, but really helpful to hear about. And we're gonna get into a lot of that now and then in the Q&A. Before I completely leave the SVOG, I am posting in the chat the link that you should be checking sort of fairly regularly for updates and new information and frequently asked questions on the shuttered venue operator grants. That is the link where they will post that information. So PPP, there is nearly $285 billion available for both first draw, if you never went for it last year, and second draw forgivable loans through March 31st. Whether you're going for a PPP 1 or 2, anything that you do after December 27th, 2020, when the bill, the most recent relief bill, was signed into law, if you want to go for an SVOG grant, you cannot apply for PPP. So that is the determining factor. We had a meeting early this morning with the SBA administrators who are developing the SVOG program, and we specifically said, what if people put in an application to try and hedge their bets and at least get both applications kind of going and ready? Can they withdraw the PPP application in favor of SVOG? And they said, unfortunately, the way PPP is set up, you apply and your bank just puts the money in your account. So there's no way to really stop that process midstream. And they said their interpretation of statute is no. The disqualifying event is actually applying for PPP if you want an SVOG. If you apply for a PPP and you are turned down, then you can apply for an SVOG, and vice versa, though the timing I don't think would work, and vice versa. Congress has set aside funds for new and smaller borrowers. This was in their guidance that they released, I think, in December, for borrowers in low and moderate income communities and for community and small lenders. They set aside money that includes $15 billion across first and second draw PPP loans for lending by community financial institutions, and $15 billion and $25 billion respectively for first draw and second draw PPP loans for borrowers with a maximum of 10 employees and for loans less than $250,000 to borrowers in low and moderate income neighborhoods. So as we've heard, that was a help and hopefully would continue to be. Qualifications for PPP second draw, the cap on numbers of employees was lowered from 500 for the first round to no more than 300 for this second draw. You do have to use the full amount of your PPP first draw money before receiving a second draw. You have to demonstrate you've used all your money. You don't necessarily have to have applied for your forgiveness, but you have to have used all your money. You do have to demonstrate a 25% reduction in gross receipts in any one calendar quarter compared to the same quarter from 2019. For nonprofits, gross receipts are as defined under the terms of the Form 990. You can compare annual gross receipts in 2020 compared to 2019, so you can use the annual. Gross receipts is different than gross revenue, so definitely look into that. You know, if you have an accountant you work with or an auditor, the definition is a bit different for gross receipts. And I've already said this, you can only go for one or the other, SVOG or PPP. Next slide, please. Allowable expenses have been expanded to include software and other computing costs, moving expenses, personal protection equipment, whatever it's called, PPP expenses, and other expenses that are required for complying with public health and safety guidelines from March 1st last year to the end of the national emergency declaration. The bill does maintain that the current requirement that 60% of costs be attributed to payroll in order to receive your full loan forgiveness. So the PPP is definitely about keeping people on payroll. The prior requirement that borrowers deduct if you had an economic injury disaster loan, an EIDL, from your last year, it was you could go for one or the other, or that you couldn't deduct that, you had to deduct that amount. That has been repealed. Now you can have both. If you had $10,000 that was like forgiven through EIDL, now you can have that plus whatever you get through your PPP. Borrowers would be eligible for loan forgiveness equal to the amount of allowable costs spent during the period of your choosing, between 8 weeks and 24 weeks. You can identify how many weeks following the origination date of the loan. And SBA has put in place a new streamlined loan forgiveness, and maybe Andrea can talk about that at the end, for borrowers with loans of $150,000 and under, which is great news that the process has been streamlined. Next slide, please. Now your how to do the math on PPP. Again, the calculation is 2.5 times your average monthly payroll costs, or a cap of $2 million. So PPP, a cap is 2 million, SVOG, it's 10 million, and the calculations are different. We'll come back to that, to the comparison. You have a choice of 12 months prior to applying for the loan, or 2020 or 2019 calendar years. And you should run different versions of that calculation in order to determine which months are the best to apply for. Next slide, please. What do you need to do to get ready if you want to go for PPP? Gather your financial information from 2020 and 2019. The next bullet is a hyperlink to review the SBA guidance on PPP. You should consult your financial institution and your accountant. SBA will issue additional interim final rules and guidance. Keep looking for more guidance. If you use the same lender and payroll time frame as your first draw loan, and you already submitted the required payroll documentation, you do not have to submit additional payroll documentation for that second draw application. Bye, Ricardo. Thank you for being here. We'll send you the slides and the recording. Now I'm going to jump into employee retention tax credits. Didn't know you could overlap.
That's Chandra. So if you applied for PPP 1 from, let's call it March to July, or made it whatever, 8 weeks ending in July, you can apply again for that same time frame?
That's my understanding, but you probably, I'm going to ask Andrea to get into that in Q&A,
Okay, cool.
but probably for different employees, perhaps, right? Can't double. Andrea, actually, do you want to jump in?
I think that you can't use the same expenses.
Right.
So if, let's say you had more than you could use the first time, yes. And then but I think that you're really going for the second draw, which is a whole new time period.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
I think so. Okay, let's try for employee retention tax credits. And forgive us if we don't always know, like, if we don't know something, we'll try and figure it out and get back to you. But yeah, next slide, please. So the employee retention tax credit is a refundable tax credit against certain employment taxes. It was developed under the CARES Act and encourages businesses to keep employees on your payroll. And there is a hyperlink here for the appropriate IRS pages. It was offered last year. It was extended, and I'll get into more detail in a moment, but the extension, we're waiting for further Treasury guidance on how it will roll out going forward. Next slide, please. So last year, if you went for a PPP, you were told you could not go for an employee retention tax credit. That was reversed in the bill that was signed at the end of December. Now you may access both ERTC and PPP as long as both are not used for the same wages. So you'd need to do a spreadsheet. These staff people in this particular time frame were covered by this federal program or this federal program, and you wouldn't be using both ERTC and PPP for the same people on your payroll at the same time. You'd have to cover different expenses. Otherwise, it's considered double dipping. It is retroactive for qualifying wages in 2020. It was extended through July 1st of this year and significantly expanded and raised the credit from 50% to 70% of qualified wages. So in 2020, 50% of up to $10,000 in wages per year per employee were provided. An organization had to be operating under a full or partial suspension, like due to government regulations, like you have to close, or be operating under a 50% gross receipts decline. In 2021, that is expanded to 70% of up to $10,000 in wages per quarter per employee, rather than per year, per quarter per employee, again, under a government shutdown, basically suspension of activity, or a 20% gross receipts decline. So that was made easier to access. Next slide, please. So I know you, a bunch of you asked this, and everybody else was probably thinking about it at the beginning of this session. What do you do to pick the best thing for your organization? First, I would suggest just calculate which is going to be the most advantageous option. If you're going to need to look at your payroll and calculate all sources of earned revenue. For SVOG, the grant amount is based on 45% of your gross earned revenue from 2019. That's the dollar amount. For PPP, it's 2.5 times your average monthly payroll costs, up to $2 million for the second draw. It's really going to be an individual decision, organization by organization, but I would look at those, just the calculations, and see which is better. Then, have you already applied for a PPP second draw? Then your decision may be made for you already, because you can't do both and you can't withdraw your application. I guess then another question is, can you afford to wait a few more weeks until the SVOG guidelines, more guidance comes out and the applications are actually published? PPP doesn't close until March 31st. My guess is that PPP is not going to run out of money. It's like more than $280 billion. SVOG is $15 billion. Who knows? I don't know. We've not ever gotten any data from the commercial sector as to how much they think they need to cover, their sector. So we don't know for sure. I do know that for the professional nonprofit field, we went to SMU Data Arts in October and we asked them, based on the universe of theaters and dance companies and opera and symphony, the range of professional nonprofit performing arts, and the parameters of SVOG, which is 45% of your gross earned revenue with a cap of $10 million. What is the pot? What do we need to advocate for? We asked them, and it was $2.3 billion. I was sort of relieved that it wasn't like $30 billion or something, because we knew that the bill would end up at somewhere between, if it passed, somewhere between 10 and $15 billion. It did go to $15 billion when movie theaters got included. But we think that 2.3 billion, and that's if every last organization that's eligible actually applies for SVOG. I believe that there will be enough money, but that's me wearing my advocacy hat. I can't advise you to go one particular way or the other. If your circumstances allow for you to wait a little bit longer, a couple more weeks, to see how SVOG rolls out, then at least you'll be better positioned to make your decision based on the full information on both programs, SVOG and PPP, and then make the best decision you can. Can you please move to the next slide? I can't even remember what's there. There you go. I'm going to turn it to Andrea to say a few things even before we go back and see what other questions there are. Andrea Nellis is our interim Chief Financial Officer. We are going to provide technical assistance sessions with Andrea for small groups of theaters, of BITOC theaters, to come together and go through the application more line by line, but we have to wait until the applications are actually available. They haven't posted it yet. They're not ready yet. But once they do, we will roll this opportunity out very quickly. And there also is my email address if you have questions after this session. But Andrea, I know there were some specific points you wanted to raise.
No, I did. I would love to make a couple of points. You know, one thing about the money for the PPP, and I agree that the PPP is not going to run out. I just want to remind people that the first round PPP, anybody could get it. You did not have to show a decline in revenue. And now you have to show a decline in revenue, and it can't be of 25%, you know, in one quarter. So it is not open to everybody. Plus there's a limit of $2 million on the grants, and there's a limit on, I think it's 300 employees. So it is not open to the big organizations that really took a lot of the funds. And a couple of points about banks. You know, I bank at Citibank, and my business never got it through Citibank. I ended up at Dime Savings Bank, which is a small New York savings bank, who's actually, if people are in New York, has been extremely helpful, and you could reach out. I can give you my person. But the other thing that people have been successful on PPPs is some of the online banks. Cabbage, I got a lot of artists PPPs through Cabbage online with a K, and also QuickBooks online. They seem to move fast. Sorry, I'm going through my notes as I came up with questions before. The PPP forgiveness process, I would suggest if anybody who is thinking they should apply for PPP forgiveness now, they should wait, because you should think about where you're allocating your payroll, because maybe you could use some of the payroll for the employee retention tax credit. So on the groups that I work with, we have just paused until we see the employee retention tax credit rules, and then maybe we can lay it out more holistically. But one thing I just want to point out on the forgiveness, there is a safe harbor provision that says if you are not able to operate the way you were able to operate before, then you no longer have to be concerned with the FTE counts. And I had this conversation with several bankers, and I can't see that any group is not impaired, that nobody, even, you know, I went down the path about TCG, and we can't go into the office, and we couldn't have our conference in person, and that made us impaired, and we were not operating. So I don't see how any theater could say that their business has not been impaired and they can't just apply the easy form and not worry about the FTE count. And then another part on the forgiveness on the first round PPP, you could choose the 8-week or the 24-week. So if you didn't have enough expenses in the 8-week, which is what we were originally thinking, you could choose the forgiveness on the 24 weeks, which gets you, 3 times the amount of payroll that you could use. So what you should think about it that way. And I've seen that most people are getting forgiven. The other thing, sorry if I'm just going through, on the forgiveness, if you got a PPP under 150,000, you now only need to use the easy, there's a easy form, and you don't provide any backup. You just certify that you spent it, and they say you should keep your payroll records for 4 years. I was just going through, I know that there have been several comments about people paying people on 1099s versus payroll.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is really when you should think about looking at the shuttered venues, because the shuttered venues covers you in that situation. But I do want to remind everybody that as an individual who receives payments as an independent contractor who files a Schedule C, you can get a PPP. You can get a second PPP. It is based on if the total income on your Schedule C up to a cap of 100,000, you divide that number by 12 and you multiply it by 2.5. So they're estimating your monthly income. And many of the people who run organizations that are paying people on 1099s, they could use this and get themselves money. And the reason why 1099s are not covered in the PPP is because they don't want people to double dip, that they have this provision for independent contractors on the PPP. So don't forget about it. Everybody should go get their money. And it is relatively simple. You just need to show your Schedule C.
So Andrea, the fact that some organizations do not have their PPP1 loans forgiven yet may actually work to your advantage. I have been looking on the Finance Director Circle group, and several folks were able to pull their forgiveness application from their lenders, and they may decide to revise them.
Yes.
Because you might want to look at the employee retention tax credit and how that intersects with your PPP1 and revise your forgiveness application accordingly, because you might be able to get more money, because now looking back, it's retroactive, you can do both. So, but I totally agree with Andrea. Organizations are starting to get their forgiveness, and you will get your forgiveness, but do think about it in the most advantageous way possible. I see that Ariana had a question in the chat.
That's what I was just going to say, Lori. I think we're transitioning into the Q&A section. So Lori, Andrea, stay on board. Thank you so much for the information to date. There were some questions earlier, and then also I see that Ariana's question might be easier to voice it if able. What y'all might want to do, we don't have any other screen shares for this session. So if you wanted to move to gallery mode, that's totally your call. If you wanted to put in a question into the chat, I'll be watching the chat. Or if you wanted to voice your question just in the chat, if you could just say either question or hand, and I'll be tracking that and make sure that we get to you. And a great reminder from Corinna, and Lori mentioned our TCG finance group that's on the circle, and it's in the chat. And I know that several folks, if you reach out to Corinna, I know that several folks have already been able to get a lot of peer support and answers to their questions via that finance group. There's a question actually earlier that we might want to come back to. I think it was Chandra who had a question about how you define administrative costs. I don't know if there's an easy answer to that.
I don't know. I am assuming that that will be defined later, but I would assume it in a more general fashion: printing, copier lease, postage, those kinds of things. But I would assume that that will be defined later, and hopefully it could be defined broadly, that it could be your auditor and your legal costs. But I could see a world that it could be very broad. To me, when I saw administrative costs, I was like, general operating. But I'd be curious to, I think we need to wait and see the definition.
Yeah, cool. Ariana, I know that you've got a question, and if you'd like, do you want to voice it, or certainly I could read it, your call.
I'm on mute. Okay, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I can voice it. I was just looking through, I managed to get an email about the frequently asked questions that were updated on the 27th from the SBA. And I was just looking through some of those points. And point 9 kind of like stuck out at me when it said, I can't remember what the question was, but it said that no other, if a particular venue such as a circus, fair, or entertainment business that provides talent at weddings or parties cannot meet this requirement, is not eligible to apply for SVOG. And what they're talking about is entities that go from different spaces to perform and don't necessarily have operate a venue. So I was concerned because that applies to us. We don't actually operate a venue. We go to different places throughout the city to perform. And while it's talking about circuses, I don't know if that disqualifies us, because previously it said you didn't have to have a venue. And then this kind of popped out at me as like, well, if you go from space to space, is that something that, I don't know if that, since we're nonprofit, so that's my question. Are we qualified or disqualified? Or is it?
Don't be alarmed. Do not be alarmed. You're fine. The requirement about fixed seats is only by statute, and I confirmed with SBA this morning, only in reference to movie theaters and museums in the bill. It does not apply to performing arts organizations. So whether they are quite clear or not that theaters have black box spaces and, you know, seats that move, it does not apply to our sector. You are totally fine. You do not need to own your space. You can perform in multiple spaces around town. That was meant to disqualify entities that are not meant to be served in this bill. If a movie theater is an outdoor drive-in movie theater, they're not eligible.
I see.
Okay. And same thing with circuses and wedding venues and other types of things. And museums, as I mentioned before, some museums will be eligible, but they have to have a performance space with fixed seats. So not all museums and historical societies will fit into this bill. But for our purposes, theaters and other performing arts organizations, the fixed seat thing does not apply to our sector.
So again, to clarify, black box theater spaces are fine because they are performance spaces, correct?
Correct. Yes.
So even, so I guess my question, because I saw the fixed seat one, but I think I was referring to the one that says, is the mobile entity with no fixed performance space eligible to apply?
It's all about the fixed seating and the fixed
Okay.
space. And you're okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm just scanning through. I don't see any other questions at this point. Quick question. So Deidre, I don't know if you want to voice it. Otherwise, I can read it. You're free to unmute yourself if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. And I think this is, you know, I asked in the beginning some of the struggles, right? As smaller organizations having the financial bandwidth. We use a paymaster to process payroll. Are we still eligible for a PPP loan? Can we still apply?
Were you able to get the first round that way?
No, we didn't apply for the first round.
You know, I haven't done it with a paymaster, but I've done it with a PEO, you know, so that you use another company and they're the pay. I would assume it's the same function as a paymaster, and we were able to get the PPP. We showed that you can show the bank records that it's showing out of yours.
Yeah, I can show bank records and invoices from them that show that we are the ones who are paying the.
And you should see, there might be a world you could end up getting the first and second. I don't know, but I would ask that question.
You cannot apply for them together simultaneously. You'd still have to go for your PPP 1, get the money and use it before going for your PPP 2. So if you want to do that, I would get going as fast as possible.
Because if you did that today, there's a possibility, because March 31st, the only issue is so I would move on that one. Because it also could be that the deadline is extended.
Awesome.
I had a question in the chat that came just to me about, is it data from 2019? Is that a calendar year or a fiscal year? And they have not clarified that yet. So we do not have an answer from SBA on that yet.
I'm not seeing any other questions popping up. I was actually up. Question is a direct message. Here we go. To get the forgiveness form, do you contact the SBA?
Your bank has every bank seems to have there is a form and they're on the SBA website, but different banks some of them have portals and some of them have you submit the form.
Okay.
Contact your lender.
You know, I just want to comment also you know, we said about applying for the second PPP for the same amount. I've actually had to resubmit all the documents. So on Chase. So don't be surprised if the bank does make you resubmit.
Lori, earlier, I think it was you who was talking about the relationship with the SBA office, the local office. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Oh, I think that you could probably, I haven't looked for it, but on the SBA website, find the list of the regional offices. I believe they said there are 68 of them, and I would look for the one that's closest to you. And just reach out to them and say, you know, you understand that this SVOG is coming. Some of the regional offices have already had like webinars, and they're starting to roll out some limited amount of information, but I would get to know them. And, you know, as everything in this world, it's a lot about relationships. So just like with PPP, it's important to have a relationship with a local lender. It's also important to sort of begin to build that relationship and get to know your local SBA person.
Mhm. Okay, I'm just checking in with Leslie, or I know Torange. I think Snehal, you're probably good, but if,
yeah.
Sorry?
Torange had her hand raised a moment ago.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that two things. One, that using an external payroll processing service was not an issue for our PPP. We have one, and that wasn't an issue. And the other thing, that our local lender now provides us with regular updates on all the regulations, and they in fact sent us the forgiveness application when it became available. So they're like, this recommendation that you're making to build a relationship with your local lender, I think is really important. We haven't been able to reach our local SBA office. We get all the information from their website, but we have a great relationship with our local lender, and that's really served us well.
Right. And Corinna just posted in the chat about the lender match on SBA, and that might be a great way to help you all connect with the lender. Snehal, do you want to voice your question?
Yes, I just had a question about eligibility. So for the shuttered venue, it's the grant is based on 2019 earned revenue, but when you get it is based on total gross revenue, correct? Contributed and earned? No.
No. So the eligibility for the program overall is that you need to show a minimum 25% decline in gross earned revenue. So that's the first time we see that definition come, or that phrase come up. So you need to show a minimum 25% decline in gross earned revenue in one calendar quarter of 2020 compared to 2019. But then the grant amount is based on 45%, again, of your gross earned revenue in 2019. The only place where revenue showed up was in access to the priority periods. And that's the place that hasn't been defined. So I'm not sure if that will include only earned revenue or gross earned revenue, or whether that will also include charitable contributions and total revenue. So the only piece that seems uncertain is access to the priority periods, where you have to show a 90% decline in revenue. We don't know yet what's included in revenue for the first 14 days, and the second 14 days, a decline of 70%. But in terms of the overall eligibility and the grant amount, it's based on gross earned revenue. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay.
And thank you for these questions. I mean, as they pop up, I think it's the peer-to-peer kind of connection and learning opportunity. There might be a question that comes out now that might come to you later, and you'll be able to go back to this recording and the slide deck to reference. And, you know, just letting you all know, this is not the last time that you could ever come to any of us at TCG with a question or help. Again, as soon as we know the applications are out, we'll be sending an email out to you with information about smaller group sessions. Lori, Andrea, is there anything that you wanted to, oh, I have a question from Leslie about disqualification.
Yeah, thank you. Is there any, sometimes there's confusion. There's been some language out there about if you apply for PPP, it disqualifies you for the SVOG or vice versa. I was just curious if you might speak to that, just in case we come across that language and like, oh no, you know?
Yeah, the federal government is considering it double dipping to go for both. So if you've applied for a PPP anytime after December 27th, whether it's a PPP 1 or a PPP 2, you are not eligible to apply for an SVOG. If your PPP application is denied, it is turned down, then you're eligible to apply for an SVOG. But the way I used disqualifying was simply by applying for a PPP, that is the disqualifier for applying for an SVOG. In other words, we had hoped people could put in their application for PPP and apply when the applications come out for SVOG and simply turn down their PPP if the SVOG is better. And they're saying, nope, no can do. You have to pick one. So because the way PPP is structured, once you apply, you're like in the system, in the banking system, and the money will just show up in your account when you get it. There's no way to sort of halt that process. And so they're saying the disqualifier is actually applying for PPP. So you really have to evaluate both. If you haven't, has anybody put in an application for a PPP2 at this point? Or are you still all trying to decide? So my guess is that people are trying to decide. And so if you're in that place where you're trying to determine which is the better route, do not put in your application yet for a PPP, because that will disqualify you from being able to apply for an SVOG.
Thank you. Well, you kind of mentioned that in the slides, but I just wanted to, review
Totally.
that.
It's really important, like it's really hard. I just want to acknowledge we're in a really tough moment. You're all making like these, really big decisions for the future of your organization based on not enough information. And I just want to acknowledge that. More information will be coming from SBA over the coming couple of weeks. We're going to see more guidance posted on that FAQ and on that page that I linked. The overall page that I linked to included the FAQ page as a link in there. So keep checking that page and we will share stuff as it comes out. I know it's a tough moment.
I
And I know, this, oh, sorry, go ahead, Andrea.
just comment, I work with I do outsource finances for a bunch of performing arts groups. And what we've really been, we're definitely just in this place of kicking the can. And I have been having weekly finance committee meetings with most of my groups because it's a big decision and we're evaluating the information. I mean, and at the moment, my general feeling is that unless I see the PPP starting to go fast, there's no reason not to just wait a little. And but everybody has said it's been going slowly. So I'm in a place of let's wait, and each week we are reevaluating. And the one other thing, this is on a more technical thing, is everybody should look at some of the things for these things are much easier now. All the payroll systems have added PPP reports. So most of them have canned reports that say have your average monthly payroll. So I was able to look at 2019 versus 20, and it was very simple. Even the most simple payroll systems I have been finding have had reports specifically designed for the PPP forgiveness. So people should make sure they check into that on their payroll service.
And one of the things that just keeps coming back to me over and over again on this call and the one that we had yesterday, which was pretty much the same session, was just the value of sharing knowledge and cohorts. Teresa Coleman Wash in Texas really got together with about 40 other BITOC arts organizations to share information, to help talk through. And so I would encourage you to talk with others in your immediate community. They may know a community lender that they've had great success with, or state or local relief funds that you might be eligible for. And certainly there are service organizations that are regionally based. So I would just encourage you all to share information with each other, because as many of you have said, it's quickly changing and it's coming out like moment to moment. Certainly, we want to encourage accurate information rather than misinformation, but share it. And we're trying to put out as much information as we can on our circle, which is where we, circulate a lot of TCG's circle, where we circulate a lot of our kind of late breaking news and information. I'm just checking in with Lori and Andrea, and I think Adrian may still be on the call, and certainly Snehal, Leslie, Torange, Chandra, if there are any kind of
Yes, I just wanted to add that, for small theater companies that produce out of small venues, our annual box office revenue, which is the bulk of our earned revenue, is pretty small. So you can look at what 45% of your earned revenue is in 2019. And if 24 weeks of payroll is more than that, then the decision is easy to make, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. Snehal, Leslie, Chandra, anything else you want to share here in our last couple of minutes?
I just have the other thing I want to highlight is that there's talk about other stimulus packages, but this one, what I hear is that this is our best chance. So they don't tend to fund the same groups over and over. I don't know if Lori, if you have anything else, but just to know that this is our pretty much our biggest shot in terms of relief funding.
I think this is definitely, thanks Snehal, this is a big opportunity. I mean, really, both between PPP and SVOG, as Torange said, do the math and figure out which one is going to be better, knowing for sure that PPP and ERTC can intersect with each other. That package may be better for you. In terms of additional and future relief, Senator Schumer is now the majority leader. Woo! Sorry, a little New York stuff. Anyway, he is such a supporter of what was called Save Our Stages for so many months. He actually wore his Save Our Stages mask to the inauguration. If we need more money and it runs out, we have a huge advocate. That's not a guarantee, but yes, we are, as advocates, the arts advocacy community is already looking at the Biden administration's $1.9 trillion package that they've already put out there. And we're already looking to the next relief package. So, if PPP needed to be replenished or SVOG, we'd be advocating for that, as well as extended unemployment, all of the various mechanisms. We're asking for, the cultural agencies to get relief funding like they did in the CARES Act. So we'll be keeping track of all the various opportunities. But yes, this is a major moment, and take advantage of these opportunities that are before you for sure.
And I once again wanted to give a shout out to Leslie, Snehal, and Teresa Coleman-Wash, who was on the call yesterday, for coming to TCG and saying, hey, listen, there's this thing that we feel is perfect for TCG to help us sort through and give us, some support on. So many, many thanks to the three of you all for being on the team that helped us on this call. And we're going to continue in other ways. Certainly, this is one way. If you're not already a TCG member, then you may not know this, but we are inviting BITOC, Black Theaters, Indigenous Theaters, and Theaters of Color to join TCG for free for the period between now and December 31st. So if you haven't already taken advantage of that, reach out to us and we're happy to help you through. Lori, as you can tell already, is a great mastermind on advocacy areas, and there are other action alerts that will come your way that will impact the field, certainly the larger field as well as BITOCs. And lastly, I think Adrian mentioned this at the top, TCG's got a reframe mission, which is to lead for a just and thriving theater ecology and centering BIPOC and BITOC in our work, in all of the programming that we do. So we really would love to hear from you as to what is going to make your lives a little bit easier, what is going to help you get a better night's sleep. You know, short of having a shot of whiskey, right? That's not always the solution. I wanted to thank the full team. We're going to be archiving the video with additional resources and more as it all unfolds. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Erica, for being behind the scenes here. Take care, you all. More to come.